Thank you. As I mentioned earlier in my introductory remarks, the forum this afternoon is in two pieces. The first piece I hope you found to be as educational and as inspiring as I did. Howard and his three cooperative trio members up here did an outstanding job, and I hope there's some very significant, sincere takeaway for all of you. This afternoon session will be hopefully not only as educating and inspiring, but also, as I alluded to, also entertaining. We started this practice a couple of years ago where it was felt that we didn't have enough interface to the inductees during the formal ceremony, which will take place later this evening. So we sort of rewound the tape a little bit, and we wanted to make them available to you this afternoon as part of the forum. You can almost see the glow of the halos on top of each one of their heads. But I think Judy may tilt some of those halos a little bit by maybe asking some questions about their career development, their family lives, any other things that they'd like to confess before they get on stage tonight. So with no further ado, I'll have Queen Judy come up and lead the Inquisition. Thank you.
Thank you, Gap, but I'm going to stay seated because I'm mic'd and ready to go here. Welcome all to the part of the afternoon where we get to meet our honored folks who are going to be inducted into the Cooperative Hall of Fame tonight. It's the highest honor that the cooperative community bestows on our leaders and people that have inspired us. I have a series of questions. I think I'm going to start out. I'm going to ask John Johnson to go first. Hope you met John Johnson from CHS who's being inducted. Then we have Rita Hayes from Credit Union, Faith Credit Union being inducted. Rich La Rochelle from CFC, who's going to be inducted tonight. And Carol and John Zippert from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. So I'll ask the first question, and you all can answer this, and then I might mix it up as we go along. But John Johnson just warned you all, I asked you to go first. And I'd like to know, since you're going to be honored tonight for your work with cooperatives, how did you get involved with co-ops and why did you stay?
Well, that goes back nearly 40 years ago now, which I had a lot blacker hair back in those times. My family grew up on a farm and ranch in the western part of North Dakota, and I didn't realize it at the time, but as a young child, all of our business in a little town called Bowman, North Dakota, which nobody's ever heard of, was all with cooperatives. Our grain got marketed to a co-op, our fuel and our propane came from a cooperative. We even had a cooperative grocery store in the town. But at the time, I didn't think much about it. And then, of course, when I got into my business career, I worked for corporate America for a few years, and then I went to work for a co-op back in that time, it was GTA Feeds. And I'll never forget, I switched the customers from the company I was with to the co-op. And I had one very large feedlot operator in southeastern South Dakota says, well, Cal, I don't know if I want to do business with you. You went to work for the communists. I went home, and I thought, now what in the dickens does that mean? It makes no sense to me. But I convinced him to continue to do business with me. And after that first year, he did business. He had competitive prices, and I took a dividend check out to him. And I'll tell you what, he was the firmest customer I ever had in my career. He said, you mean you pay me back to do business with you? And that set the tone for the rest of my career.
Wonderful, thank you. Rita, what got you involved and why did you stay?
Well, I got involved because many African Americans were denied access to financial institutions to be able to borrow money and save and learn all about thrift. I found out that cooperatives had a credit union background. So that's when we started it was Mount Sinai Baptist Church Credit Union out of our church. And we were able to offer loans and services and teach financial counseling to many in our community who had been deprived of financial ability to get loans. And so that is what started us back in 1958. And we continued our cooperative partnerships with the Federation and other co-ops, and today we are still in existence and very proud of Faith Community United Credit Union and what it's doing to help low-income people and keep them from payday lenders, hopefully.
And so that's why you stayed involved.
Yes,
Continue to
that's why
provide
we
those
stayed
services.
involved, because there's still a need.
Thank you. Rich La Rochelle, what got you involved and why did you stay involved with cooperatives?
About 43 years ago, someone gave me the wrong directions, and I was graduated from college, came down to D.C. looking for a job, and I was walking up and down Constitution and Independence, looking at government agencies, and I was looking for the Department of Agriculture Personnel Office, and it was late one afternoon, and so I couldn't find it, and I asked someone, and they said, oh, that's in the other building, but you might find some agency personnel offices down these corridors. So I walked down the corridor, I saw Rural Electrification Administration and this nice wooden sign. So I walked in, and the personnel director, Ed Moriarty, had gone to the same college I had gone to in Worcester, Massachusetts. So the receptionist said, oh, you need to see Mr. Moriarty. So he came out. We talked for a few minutes, and he said, when do you want to start? So they hired me, and here I am. 40 years later, I retired from CFC. So that's kind of what happened to me. Not as high-minded as these two, but it's, that's my story.
You can't give a little inkling of why you stay involved? It was your first job? And
Well,
that
what
was it?
happens with co-ops, I think, is co-ops get in your blood. I think there's kind of two aspects of co-ops that were meaningful to me. One is, the fact that you're working for a business to support a business that makes a difference in people's lives. A co-op, as we all know, is both a business and it has a social agenda, and that keeps you motivated during the ups and during the downs. And then secondly is the kind of people you get to work with. I was really, really lucky to work for some of the best people, I think, in the world, work for and with, and people who shared core values. And twice I left co-ops. Went to work for a Boston Edison company, which is now merged with a couple of other utilities. It doesn't exist in that form anymore, but I was there for about a year, and it just didn't feel like home. Came back to work for co-ops, and then once I went to work for the Farmers Home Administration and had the same experience, but NRECA recruited me, the National Rural Electric Co-op Association. It felt like coming back home. So co-ops get in your blood, and I think that's what keeps us going. I still haven't been able to get them out of my blood.
Oh, do you want to elaborate? We'll come back on
No.
that one. Carol, what got you involved and why did you stay involved in cooperatives, with
Okay.
cooperatives?
Good afternoon. I'm originally from Lafayette, Louisiana, and that's where I got involved with cooperatives. We started with literacy programs, and our mentor was a Catholic priest, Father A.J. McKnight. He was the first black priest in my church parish, so he was a big deal for us. And he had us involved. I was actually following an older brother. This was in the early 60s. And I was a teenager following an older brother that I really admired. He was actually the one teaching in the literacy class, and I just went to follow him around. But those classes began to talk about, well, so what? We're learning, yes, to read and all of that, but it's not benefiting us. What are we going to do with all of that? At the same time, this was the civil rights movement going on. And the same folks were the ones who were organizing to integrate places, lunch counters in particular. And I remember I was one of those that went to a Woolworth's lunch counter, and I was so disappointed because they served us, but in Lafayette, Louisiana, African Americans were only maybe 20% of the population, so it was a different level of threat. There was less of a threat in that community. But we began with desegregation in the civil rights movement. we began to say, well, so what? We didn't own these places. They were not ours. So we began to talk about what our assets were in the community and how we could use our assets to build businesses. We were looking at economic development. And it was Father McKnight who knew about cooperatives in the Midwest and started getting information for us to school ourselves on what that whole concept of cooperatives was all about. And we began to raise funds to send people to workshops and seminars, different places. And I was one of those that they began to groom very early on into that whole co-op movement. I was sent to various workshops. I even was sent to, sponsored, to go to the Coady International Institute for Cooperative and Credit Unions at St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, Canada. You see, I remembered all of that. We developed consumer cooperatives and got in with farmers and also worked, with developing farmer cooperatives. So, we've been doing it more than 50 years, y'all. And I was not an infant. So y'all can do the math. But I stayed because we didn't do it. We did it for survival. It was our way of surviving. How were we going to make it economically? And cooperatives became the answer for us. And then I stayed because when you come together in a cooperative, that spills over into trying to resolve or work on other issues in the community that are important to you, other social issues, other social changes that need to come about. So I stayed because it was a way of life. It was in the blood, in the spirit, in the soul. There just wasn't any other way for me to go, that I had come up in it too early, too young, and it was my way of life. And every other decision I made, it was influenced by my being an organizer and a worker in the cooperative movement. It even decided, who I would marry.
Yeah, I was just...
50 years ago.
Thank you, Carol, because I was going to ask you, tee off from that, did it influence you to marry the gentleman next to you, which was Mr. John Zippert?
Absolutely.
And John, think about your answer now. What got you involved and why did you stay? So you better think long and hard before you answer, please.
Okay. So in June of 1965, I was 19 years old. And I volunteered to go to Louisiana with the Congress of Racial Equality Corps and to work in the civil rights movement for the summer. And I often say it was a long summer because it kept going. The Congress of Racial Equality sent me and 3 other volunteers to St. Landry Parish, Louisiana. Opelousas is the county seat. And I found out later that St. Landry Parish in the 60s had the largest number of black farmers and sharecroppers in Louisiana. The other thing was that the civil rights movement and people coming to do civil rights work were not welcomed by everybody. And many people were fearful of getting involved with civil rights and civil rights workers and people from somewhere else. Anyway, the farmers, though, people who had some degree of independence because they owned their own land, or they were sharecropping on other black people's land, were the people who were most receptive to work with us. And they posed to me the question, can you help us to market our own sweet potatoes? We feel we're being exploited by the shippers and the markets. And I always say this, that I went to the City College of New York, I studied economics, I studied political science, I studied history, and none of that were cooperatives ever discussed. And I think that's, you know, that's a failure. Some of it is the failure of the education system, and some of it is our failure for not forcing it into the school systems and the colleges for people to really understand. So I learned with the farmers what cooperatives were. I wrote to the Farmers Cooperative Service in USDA. I wrote other places. I got information, educated myself, and in the process of that, they said, well, you're not too far from this black Catholic priest in Lafayette, Father A.J. McKnight, and you ought to contact him and work together with him. Now, he was 30 miles away. I came from New York City. I didn't have a driver's license. But I eventually got in touch with Father McKnight. And one day, Father McKnight, Carol Prejean, her brother Charles Prejean, who was became the first executive director of the Federation, and Mr. Alfred McZeal, who became the manager of Southern Consumers Cooperative, came to a meeting I had with the farmers. And the rest is history. And just to say that cooperative, the cooperatives we worked with in Louisiana were among the cooperatives that organized the Federation in 1967. And we moved to Alabama. By that, we also got married in 1967 and moved to Alabama in 1971 when the Federation acquired the land that we still have today where our rural training and research center is.
Right, thanks. All right, and now Rich, I'm going to start with you and come back this way and go around. So we all have aspirations of what we'd like to accomplish, but we always don't accomplish that, and we can learn by what we didn't get done. So Rich, can you share with us what you would have liked to get done, didn't get done, and what you learned from that?
Well, I don't know. I think, so I was lucky enough to work for great organizations, REA and NRECA and CFC, and so I don't think it's so much about an individual getting something done. I think it's about, I think like in the video that we saw, it's about we and not about me. So I think that the work of cooperatives never stops. It's not about what I get done. It's about empowering others and mentoring others to get things done. When I worked at NRECA, I worked for Wally Rustad. Some of you know Wally. He was a great guy, and he was a legislative director, or the whatever we called it then, the vice president of government relations, whatever. And I remember what he always did was he would give those of us who were junior on the staff an opportunity to play key roles. If there was an important meeting on the Hill that we could handle without him there, he would do that. He would step back. And sometimes at pretty great self-sacrifice to himself, and it always seemed like what a great model that is, because it's about the team being successful. It's about accomplishing a goal for the membership. And so I always tried to mentor people so that when I retired, we were ready to carry on the work. So I think that's really more critical than a feeling like, oh my gosh, I wish I had done X, Y, and Z. Well, X, Y, and Z never gets done. There's always ongoing things. So anyway.
Right, now Rita, is there something that you really wanted to accomplish, achieve, you couldn't get there, and what did you learn and use for the rest of your co-op career?
Okay, one of the key things that drew me to the credit union cooperatives is they said not for profit, not for charity, but for service. So the cooperatives, we owned the credit union. We had control, and just as Carol said, back during the civil rights movement, we were able to attract a number of people, and we were able to shine the light to the politicians on the problems within the financial community. But one of the things we were not able to achieve, in Cleveland we had about 42 low-income faith-based credit unions. And we tried to corral all of that expertise, that knowledge, that cooperative spirit together and form a credit union co-op, an inclusive kind of co-op that could reach a lot more people. We had problems, though, of pulling all of these individual faith-based credit unions together into one, and at the time there was no internet and all this technology that we have today. So I think we were just a little before our time. But the movement has changed now to bigger is better, and a lot of the small faith-based credit unions that we tried to help are no longer in existence or have had to merge. And that has hurt me because they each served a population that was critical to their survival, and they are no longer able to do that. So that is one of the things that I regret that we were not able to do, to convince the smaller credit unions that they needed to increase or to grow by coming together and uniting.
Thank you. John?
Well, I suppose your job is never done, and you're never quite satisfied no matter what you've accomplished. And I was a CEO of this organization called CHS for 16 years, and we took it from a $4 billion St. Paul cooperative to a $40 billion company that was a Fortune 70 in the United States. So our experiences are quite a bit different than the other cooperative presenters here today. And so I don't have as many passionate stories about the model of a co-op. Our business was fight every day in the business world because our competitors were large corporations. But I told my board of directors when I first became the CEO, they said, wouldn't it be proud that farmers could own an agricultural company that was the equivalent of an ADM or a Cargill or a Bunge, any of the major corporations are out there. And when I retired, we were right in with all of them. So I felt very proud of that. But you know, when you retire, most of you probably have been through this. I woke up one day and I said, you know what, time is getting close. What are you going to do? There were 3 decisions to make. One, is the company ready? And I felt I had a wonderful staff of people. We had a financial balance sheet that was just stellar. Then the second question I asked, is my family ready? Now when you say family, my kids are all gone, so you know who I'm talking about. My wife. Is she ready to put up with me 24/7? Because after you've traveled 2 million miles on Northwest Airlines and Delta like I have, I was gone most of the time. And she said, yes, I think I'm ready. The third question is, are you ready? That meaning me. And I struggled with that one. Because when you're in that track, that fast track, you're moving along, things are going great, everybody's doing things for you as a CEO, and you say, one day I'm going to give that up. And I'm going to tell one quick story about it, because I thought I was ready. And so I retired, I moved into a home down in Arizona. It was in the wintertime. You get up in the morning and you used to have emails, and you'd have mail to go through and telephone messages to take care of. Well, when you retire from corporate America, it ends like that. Your phone is shut off, your computer is shut off, And I'm sitting in my office about 5:30 in the morning. I said, my goodness, what am I going to do? I can't golf all day. So I called my administrative assistant, and she was a wonderful, wonderful gal. I said, Jan, could you keep sending me some old reports? I don't care how old they are. They can be as dated as 3 months ago. She said, are you kidding me? I said, no, I'm not kidding you. I said, I need to wean off of this a little bit slower. So she started sending me these old reports, and I'd read them in the morning to kind of think I'm important, right? I'm still reading these reports. And it had lasted a few months, and I was able to kind of give it up. But I think we all go through that transition in life and how these jobs change.
Thank you. All right, John Zippert. Remember the question? What in your co-op career would you like to get, you tried to get and you couldn't get done, and what did you learn from that?
Well, I guess I'm a community organizer at heart. And my goal was to continue to organize new cooperatives and work with people who were wanting to get involved in the cooperatives. And I kept getting promoted to write proposals and do training and be an administrator and all of this stuff. And so I think over 50 years, the Federation has created an institution, but I'm not sure we accomplished one of the major goals we had, which was to end poverty through cooperatives in the Southeast. And poverty is still there. A lot of the communities we work in have suffered from persistent poverty over 30, 40, 50 years. 20, 30% of the people in those communities are still poor. So there's a lot more work to do. I think the Federation has started on this. This is our 50th anniversary year, but there's a lot more work to be done. In terms of this retiring, most of the people who were the core leaders of the Federation, including myself, have either totally retired or partially retired, and we have young people in place now, and we're really hoping that they will carry things forward for the next 50 years. Some people here know Ralph Page, know Cornelius Blanding, who took over from Ralph, and we have a person at the training center at EPS who took over from me. Most of what I did last year was to help recruit and put somebody in place. So I'm hopeful in that regard. But the issues of poverty and the problems related to that are still there in the rural South.
Before we move on to Carol, John, if you're retired, are you also requesting 3-month-old reports be sent to you?
I'm halfway retired,
Okay.
so I still get a lot of
So you just-
email.
50% less. Okay, thanks. Carol, what did you?
Yeah, I was gonna, if he hadn't clarified, I was gonna say, don't y'all believe it when he say he's retired. You know, he might be unemployed. I guess that I prefer to approach that question from the perspective of what we're still working on. It's not a matter of I will not think of it a matter of failure to accomplish. It's what we're still working on. And what I see, one big thing that I thought would come sooner or differently was the involvement of young adults today in the cooperative movement. You know, we came at it, we were young, and we were passionate, and we were struggling and trying to survive, but that same level of passion is not there, even though we work constantly with young folks. And I know we can't expect them to do what we did or the way we did it. You know, when in our day, you know, we had posters and placards and mimeograph machines. Some of y'all might know what that is. But, so we try to get them, use the tools you have, use your technology to grow cooperatives or to find your place in the co-op movement. And even though we work regularly with young folks, I still don't see that we have enough young leaders in place to really continue to carry on the cooperative movement. I believe it will continue. It has to, because of what it means in building community, that we have to have it. I just say we have to continue to work hard on trying to help young folks find that, yes, more of them are able to go to college, and that's good. And they may work in some other aspects. Maybe it may not be in cooperatives, but they can still be involved in cooperatives because of the important role that cooperatives play in building community. So I just say we have to find more ways to help them connect in that way.
So let me, Rita, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about mentors that you had, and what you think you can do today to be mentors. So can you share with us who in the credit union, was it credit union world, who was your mentor that got you involved and started?
Several mentors. Well, in the church, you always have the mothers and the seniors who've gone before you, telling you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But one of the mentors was a lady named Carrie Kane, who was a volunteer, because all of us volunteered in the credit union movement. And she became the treasurer, an unpaid treasurer. Then she became a councilwoman in her community, and just threw the treasurer job basically to me. So the mentors, the mentoring that she did was to not only show that she trusted that I could do the job, but she showed me how to do it, and even though she was a councilwoman, she continued to assist me. The other mentors were the board of directors in the credit union, who were men mostly who in the movement who put their money and their trust in us. And so that's how we became really sort of immersed, like someone else said here, that once you're in a cooperative, you just get that in your blood and you do whatever you can do to help others. One of the things I'm really proud of is that we helped train other young people. We had a junior, what we called a junior credit union. So we not only had our young people in the church banking, but they also learned finance, and many of them came up later to be on the board of directors, and also staff after we were able to pay for staff. So we mentored all of them, plus our families just came up in the movement. So mentoring is very important, was very important to us, and that is one of the reasons I would say today that Faith Credit Union still is in existence, because of the mentoring we did in the past, and through AACUC and the Federation, some of the other groups that we're a part of, we still do a lot of mentoring. And as a retired person, that's one of the things I do, is answer questions and help anyone in the co-op, credit union co-op movement that needs assistance.
So you're not as worried as Carol and perhaps John Zipper
I am
about the next generation coming in?
I am
You
worried, yes, because the young people today, we did all this volunteer. And the first thing the young people today say is, how much can you pay? And so we're competing with the banks and other institutions, and we tell them all this good work that we're doing, but they are more interested in I've gone to school, I've got my degree, how much can you pay? And the credit unions cannot keep up especially the smaller faith-based credit unions, with what the young generation wants to be paid. So I am concerned, but as Carol said, I know that the Lord works things out, and so the young people today seem to be coming around after they read all the stories about how we came into being. They seem to be more concerned now about volunteering and co-ops and owning an institution. So it seems to be coming back around, but for a while it was sort of a dead end for us.
Good. I'll come pick on that. So John Johnson, how do you come from a small town in North Dakota and work your way up to be CEO of a Fortune?
Very lucky.
With how many mentors?
But I tell you that I worked for a lot of leaders during that 35-year career, starting off as a salesman out in the country in the Dakotas and Minnesota, all the way to becoming the CEO and working for the board of directors. So through that process, you have to have a lot of people helping you. You have to have a lot of people that are helping you pave the road to be successful, and I had them. But on the co-op, and they were very good mentors about business and kind of the environment that you're going to work in. But here's an interesting thing. I didn't realize a lot of the history. Because if you go back in time for both the predecessor companies, which was GTA, the Grain Terminal Association, and the Farmers Union Oil Company, they started with very meager resources. And so what I did is I got the old history books out, because there was a lot of information about how these companies got started. And I mean, it was a struggle, because you had major oil companies and major grain companies that basically wanted to put them out of business because they were trying to create a fair marketplace for their farmers. And you had to really read that history to fully appreciate the struggles they went through to get to the opportunity where it's now CHS and a Fortune 70 company. Because sometimes we get a little bit naive in the fact that we're running this great big organization and it's always been that way. Well, it doesn't. Because you go back in the 40s, they struggled really hard, and you took some really dedicated advocacy people that would stick to their guns and got the kind of help they wanted. So what did we do? Because I felt the same way. The young people, they really, well, I can say they don't care, but at the end of the day, they're there for their paycheck, and they got families to raise, so I understand that. I don't disagree with that at all. But we set up I guess I'd call it a display. I have Linda, who was in charge of my communications, and we went back in history, and we got a lot of memorabilia items and put it right and made a big lobby display that kind of showed how the companies got started to what they are today. So every time an employee would walk into that office building, no matter what sixth floor on the sixth story building they were in, they had to walk by that thing. And so they understood where the beginnings were, and it was very enlightening for me that once in a while I'd be down in the cafeteria eating with some new employees, and they would ask me about that history. So you knew they were looking at it. Now, how much of it rubs off? They still need their paycheck, all those kind of things. But it's those little bit of informational pieces you can give your young employees that gives them an opportunity to be mentors. And so I had a lot of people that helped me along the way, but kind of what set myself in stone around the co-ops was reading the history. Because the struggles they went through to get them companies started were pretty devastating, and they got it done.
Good. I'm going to come back to history. That's a good point and ask it. Rich, what do you want to tell us about your mentors and what you're doing now to mentor the next generation?
Okay, well, I was lucky to have started working for the electric co-ops in 1974 when I started at the Rural Electrification Administration. REA was basically the agency that worked with local consumer-owned cooperatives, mostly farmers were the leaders, to really electrify rural America at a time when nobody else wanted to do it. The private power companies wouldn't do it, the municipal utilities wouldn't do it, and so I started in '74. There were still some people in the agency who were just leaving when I got there, who had been there from the beginning. So I was able to see from the origins of the program those people who started not knowing if they'd be successful. The government was able to recruit in those days high-quality engineers, lawyers, so forth and so on. It was hard to find a job, and people had a sense of mission, and they did phenomenal work. They developed basically a blueprint that was used by these consumer-owned electric co-ops to, take rural America from darkness to light. Phenomenal success story. So I could see that, and then throughout the years, there was, a tremendous amount of mentoring, obviously. I think the electric co-ops put a lot of focus on understanding the history. When we had our 50th anniversary, there was a 50th anniversary history book that was written. We had a postage stamp. There was a lot of focus about that. And then at CFC, Sheldon Peterson, our CEO, put a lot of focus on succession planning. So we actually had formal written succession plans. We took the whole thing very seriously. I think mentoring is of a couple types. One is those people who inspire you and who you kind of catch a spark from. You catch a little bit of spirit from, cooperative spirit. And then other people you learn technical skills from. So I was lucky to get both of those.
Do you want to talk about what you're doing now to
Okay, sure.
mentor in another sector?
So when John was talking, it's interesting because I retired, I guess, at the end of 2013. I'm pretty much a full-time volunteer. When I was working for CFC and the electric co-ops, we worked long hours. We traveled a lot. And I felt bad that I wasn't doing really any volunteer work in the community. And now I feel bad I'm doing too much. But seriously, it's a lot of fun. I believe in embracing every stage in life. Every stage is an opportunity. And everyone is different, but I really think the retirement years, if you have good health and you have adequate income, you can really focus on the things that are meaningful to you. I've been very lucky to connect with a wonderful group of people in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and we're starting a food cooperative. It's a multi-year process. We have great help from people like the Food Cooperative Initiative, mentoring from other food co-ops like Friendly City in Harrisonburg. Steve Cook there has been an angel to us, sharing so much information. People like Michelle and Karen, so many people around the country willing to share ideas. Deb Troika doing the conference. I can't name everyone, but there's a great sense of community. And when I look at the people interested in starting a food co-op, we're kind of in the third wave. You had a wave during the Great Depression, a wave in the 70s and 80s, and now we have over 100 startup co-ops, people volunteering their time, many hours a week, to start a food co-op for their community, to bring fresh local foods, to connect with the farmers, to have a sense of community. They'll never make any money off of it. None of us will make any money. We're contributing a lot. And so that gives me hope for the future, that initiative is out there. It's being supported by the existing food co-ops, and there's a network that's developing. The other thing that I've been involved with my colleague and friend Adam Schwartz is the dean of the business school at the University of Murray, Washington. I got involved with her a little bit on the food co-op. We were doing some financial feasibility work, and she asked me if I would teach a course on the co-op business model because UMW doesn't have a course like that. And the manager of the electric co-op, Kent Farmer, had been wanting that for a long time. So she asked me to do it, and I said, let me get back to you. I made the mistake of mentioning it to Adam, and he pounded the table and said, you got to do it, and we'll do it together. So we did it last fall for the first time. We had a small class this semester. In the fall, we'll do it again. We'll have, at least last time I looked, we had 19 students, so 15 to 25 is about, you don't want many more than that. We've been lucky enough to be in the Washington area. We've had a lot of great people who have come and shared their expertise with us. Some of them are in the room. I felt very strongly when I was working for the electric co-ops that it was outrageous that you can graduate with a degree in business and never once hear the word cooperative, like you were saying, John. It is crazy. Co-ops are big business in the US. Co-ops make a difference in so many ways. We have 30,000 co-ops in the US. There are over 100 million people who belong to co-ops. Hello. Co-ops should be taught in business schools. And so we were lucky enough to be able to have the university embrace us and to offer that class. I really think that as a group, we have not done a good job of making that happen. I look at other business sectors. They do a really good job of making sure that their core approach to business is embedded in business schools. We haven't done that. I think we could change it anytime we want to. One place to start would be to try to have at least in every state one co-op business class taught in one university. It's doable. If they'll let people like me teach the class, so many of you guys could do that. We'll share curriculum as others have shared with us. It is doable. It is achievable. It's outrageous we haven't done it.
Oh, Rich, nobody's told you.
Okay.
When you're inducted in the Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
what you do next
Okay,
as a
all
Hall
right,
of Fame
all right,
inductee, right? So we'll get back to that. So
All right.
we didn't want to scare you away with what your responsibility is now.
I'm
For
just agreeing with John
All
on
the
that
Hall of
point.
Fame inductees were challenged now. So, but anyway, thanks, Rich. Carol and John, you both mentioned Father McKnight. That was I was starting the round with mentor. I'm not sure if you want to both jointly talk a little bit about Father McKnight. He seems such a huge presence. Or did you have other mentors you wanted to talk about?
Well, I want to say a little bit more about him, but I had other mentors as well.
Okay.
Father McKnight, it was from New York as well. He came from Brooklyn. He was his priesthood order was Holy Ghost Fathers. And as I said, he was the first African American to be in our church parish. And of course, all of the members of the church, because the churches were segregated at that time. We were all African Americans. So he was a big deal for us. But his mentorship came with helping us to learn the whole concept of cooperatives and, that educating ourselves and getting exposed to it and then applying those principles and those techniques to organizing our community. But the other mentors there that were absolutely significant were, of course, my brother, who became the first CEO of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives eventually. But when we organized the first cooperative in Lafayette, we called it Southern Consumers Cooperative, and it was a bakery, because we were going to produce products around an asset we had, which were pecans. And we made fruitcakes and sold them mail order, and it was a huge success. But we took about 3 years to raise funds in order to open the cooperative. And we set the goal of $300 a family, which was a lot of money. And people, like my mother, would bake goods and sell them to start paying toward that $300 investment toward their shares. We used that terminology. We were purchasing our shares into the cooperative. And to see those adults invest that way, that commitment, and they would, the organizers, and I was one of them who did that, we would go to the families on whatever kind of basis they wanted, once a week or twice a month, to collect whatever little payment. It might be $2, but that's how they paid toward the $300 commitment. And in 3 years, we had raised $25,000. And we got the first SBA loan for 25 matching. And of course, the word went out, oh, wow, they gave that money to those communists over there. So the mentors were the people who, because I was young, the adults who sacrificed and just put their heart and soul into finding the resources, on a $2 a week basis to raise that kind of money to start a cooperative business so that we could own something. We could say it was ours. And one thing that came out of the cooperative movement is a youth leadership organization that we have that we started in 1985 is 21st Century Youth Leadership Movement, where we try to teach young folks participatory leadership development, and hopefully, they will, some of them will stay in the cooperative movement in some way, but so we mentor through that. And of course, at the Federation's training center, we have youth involved in farming, organic farming. They have their own project. They build their own compost, and they do it all. So we're trying to mentor. Many of them, they're not necessarily committed to making farming their livelihood, because that's not something that they could live on now. They would have to do something else. But at least those principles of working together, we find opportunities like that to at least instill the principles of cooperation and community cooperatives that way. And hopefully they will use that in their lives.
So John Zippert, mentor?
Well, similar to Carol, I think the mentors that worked with me were older people that got involved in these cooperatives and made them successful. And beyond Father McKnight, and he gave me my first job, and he also married us. And but he was a great inspiration. But I could call the name of others like Lewis Black, Albert Turner, Thelma Craig, Mildred Black, Howard Taft Bailey, Estelle Witherspoon. These were all people who got involved through the civil rights movement to take the civil rights movement to the next level of economic and social justice. And that was a big part of it. And again, and you might not have heard of any of these people, but they were the people who really made it possible for change to occur in very poor communities. And they were part of the same kind of cooperative struggle that I hear you talking about, that was the basis of a lot of cooperatives. And it's still a struggle today. The Federation is still part of a struggling effort and movement, but we are hopeful, and there are young people involved, and we're going to work harder on that to get more young people involved. So that's kind of the mentor.
Well, let's pick up on that where, John, from where you sit, each of you think about this, what's the next big thing that cooperatives should tackle?
Well, I said earlier poverty, and I'm still there. Poverty and income inequality and more economic and social justice in this society. I think cooperatives are a way to do it. And I do a lot of education with people and say a cooperative is a way for a group of people who have limited wealth to own their own job, to own their own stores, to own their own credit unions, and to make these things work. And we need technical assistance groups, we need patient capital, we need support to make all this work. So I think we have to keep the cooperative movement going, and we have to be willing to focus on the people who need help the most.
What's the next big thing for cooperatives?
Well, again, I don't want to approach it as something different to do, but something that we ought to do more of, and that we ought to celebrate community more. That is not just about, we have a leader who tells us all the time that struggle will always be with us. So what we need to do is embrace it, embrace struggle, and move and find out how we're going to move through it. So we are going to always be in struggle, and I've accepted that. So in the meantime, you got to always look for something in community to celebrate. And I think in our cooperative movement, we don't do enough of that, and we ought to do more of that. We ought to find opportunities where we celebrate with community, but that the cooperative is lifted with as well as lifting community. Put on a festival that the federation, the cooperative may co-sponsor with others in the community, something like that. We do that, and that's another way of helping people to see and to understand how significant cooperatives are in the community. And I just wanted to say our credit union in our county that we organized in 1975, we started that with about $25,000. And now we are a $1.4 million credit union. And we serve a county with less than 10,000 people. But, it was a struggle. And one other thing that we do is we've had credit union projects where we've helped young people to model the credit union business, where they had their board and their credit committees and supervisory committees, and then they would raise money and have an account in the adult credit union. And so that was another, we don't do enough of that. We need to model what we're doing with other aspects of the community.
So I'll skip over Rich and Rita since she engaged you. From where you sit, what do you think your credit union or the credit union should, next big thing that they could do, or to stay on doing what they're doing?
I agree that we should celebrate and let the rest of the world know how great cooperatives are, and what a great feeling it is to own something and control your own, to be on your own board of directors where you can help your community instead of complaining about what others aren't doing for your community. So I think that's one of the key things that we can do. Also, we've advanced by partnering and collaborating with other successful groups, and I think more should be done in that manner. The National Federation has helped us with projects that where a larger credit union could help a smaller credit union with an area that they're in need of, like technical assistance or this digital age, and attracting millennials and advertising and marketing more what the successes that we've already had in the credit union. I think this is how we can grow, and economic empowerment is key to everyone's success. And so in our low-income communities where we help the unbanked, this is very important to us, and we have to do more of it. And we have to also celebrate and let the general public know how important cooperatives are to the survival of our country.
John Johnson, where you sit?
Well, this may not be the right explanation to this audience, but I tell you, I think as cooperatives, you have to think out of the box a little bit. We're either limited by market, we're limited by skill sets, or we're limited by capital. There's always something that limits us. And I've been coming to these meetings for 35 years, and it's always, well, we can do better, we're still not there. And all I can say is that sometimes, as you indicated, partnering and creating collaboration with somebody that you may even think is your enemy today in business can have big rewards. And so kind of getting yourself thinking outside of that box that can leverage what you're good at, with some other organization that has resources that you don't have. And I'll give you one example. When the Afghan war was really in the heat, a bunch of us CEOs in Minneapolis, St. Paul got together and said, you know, this is kind of unacceptable. We have mothers and children that are starving. The war area is just devastating it. And I said, well, I can't do it on our own, but we could do it through partnering. So several of the major grain companies, we got together and we put the right money together to get flour. I'm talking shiploads of it, taken over to Afghanistan to start feeding mothers and children that were deprived. Now, there was a situation as a co-op, we had the good cause in mind, but didn't have the resources to pull it off. And through some conversations with people who I kind of thought were my competitors, we collaborated together and got it done. So my only advice is my number of years of being in this business, sometimes you need to think outside of that box. And cooperatives don't work in a vacuum. We work within a business environment and other environments that influence what we do. And sometimes looking at who may be considered an enemy today could be a great partner in some ventures in the future.
Rich, I skipped over you. What's the next big thing for cooperatives?
I think co-ops do a lot of great things. I really like the co-ops creating a better world, getting the message out about the positive things that we are doing. But I think if there's a gap in terms of startup co-ops, in terms of access to capital to make a startup co-op work. So if we're going to grow the co-op economy, I think there's a couple things which I think would be great. We should look for cross-sector approaches, which are difficult to achieve because every co-op is focused on its own members. They don't exist to foster new co-ops, they exist to serve their own members. But if we can look at cross-sector approaches, that would make a big difference. We have some of the institutions in place. I think CDF does a really good job. It should probably be twice the size. Other co-op lending funds are great. They should be bigger. It's just very difficult if you're a startup co-op really to get financing. If you're an existing co-op that's put a lot of focus on funding, there's almost no limit to funding. So we have a lot of haves and have-nots in the co-op industry. I think more focused help for capital for startups would be very helpful.
Thanks. I have a series of other questions, but before I go through my questions, is there something pressing you would like to say? It's your night, your day, something that I might not think to ask, something you would like to say, John Johnson?
Well, you kind of hit on most of the topics, but I think the question I'd put out and the challenge is how do you make the cooperatives as a business structure make a difference? And we've got a lot of stories of success, but in my mind, sometimes it's pieces, and it takes pieces to make bigger pieces. And so my challenge is how do you take what you're doing and make them even more successful, more impactful into the future? And sometimes just speaking to the choir is not what you need to do. You got to get outside that choir in order to find new advocates for the co-ops.
And what difference would you like co-ops to make? Where would you tackle if you could?
Well, we got the finance issues and economic income. For my background, it's all about food.
Okay.
And I created a family foundation, and what we do with most of our funds is all built around children. And what frustrates me is we still can wake up in the United States and some children are starving. That shouldn't happen in the United States, for crying out loud. We're the richest country in the world. So cooperatives could play a big role, and I think a lot of communities do have areas where they do food collections and things like that. And I can tell you, I had my whole family together, 6 grandkids, my son and 2 daughters, and at Christmas we got together, and I don't know, we must have made up 900 to 1,000 sandwiches a day, and they all went out to feed homeless people and children. Well, if you can get I'm just one. If you get cooperatives to figure out ways of putting resources together, you can make a big difference. And that'd be my challenge.
Great, thanks. John, do you want to issue a challenge? Think of something you'd like to add for the discussion tonight, since it's the night that you're being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Wisdom?
Well, one thing you said I brought some copies of the Greene County Democrat, which is a newspaper, the county newspaper that Carol and I published, that are on the table, that are available. And also some of Carol's poetry books if people are interested. But in terms of a challenge, I think some of the strongest work that the Federation did was to help to change the Farm Bill, to put in the rural co-op centers part, to put in the 2501 outreach program for socially disadvantaged applicants, to work on getting NRCS to serve people who had less than 100 acres of land, which are all the people who are constituents of the Federation. So I would say that we still need a program like the Rural Co-op Centers program needs to be better funded, and we need to get the urban part of that in place. And I would just challenge everybody here. I'm still working on that, and not only in the Federation, but with the Rural Coalition, which is a coalition of groups working in low-income communities and others to push for these things, and to really push Congress and the President and others to look at these things.
Great, thanks, John. Okay, Rich? What's the big challenge?
I don't really know. I'm fresh out of wisdom, but I would just say that take some time to reflect and with a sense of gratitude that we're all able to work for organizations that we believe in, that the co-op business model is kind of bigger than any of us, and just to understand the value of that and let that motivate us to do what we need to do. And what we need to do is going to change over time as circumstances and opportunities come, but I feel incredibly grateful to have worked for co-ops, and I think it's just sometimes we get so busy with the day-to-day, with the challenge of the moment, that if we quietly look at what our core values are and how lucky we are to work in an area that align with our core values, it's a great thing. So that's kind of not the next great thing, but it's something we can do in this moment. Anyway, that's what I feel.
Carol, what challenge would you issue? What would you like to say tonight on the eve of your induction?
I guess to build to a little bit on what John was bringing up. There is something in the credit union movement, what we call non-member deposits, and that's where organizations, maybe a bigger credit union, can deposit in your smaller credit union. They're not members, but the law allows for non-member deposits. And our credit union benefited from that in our early years, that we had deposits from the Navy Credit Union. You know how big they are. And from the Unitarian Universalist Church and some other groups, like, some of them were church-based and some were not. And I was just thinking of that concept, that there are big cooperatives that ought to make non-member deposits in smaller cooperatives or smaller union of cooperatives, like the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which still struggles to serve the membership. And the member cooperatives are extended from Texas to South Carolina, maybe serving 20,000 families in those various cooperatives. But the Federation still struggles as the union of those to provide the training and the exposure, the technical assistance, the lobbying, and just trying to get good laws passed that would support cooperatives. But it takes resources. So my challenge is for y'all to become some non-member depositors in groups like the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, or to find others, who could do that. Because personally, I have always organized and served as a trainer and with the Federation, but I've never been employed. John was, but the Federation is a nonprofit. Nonprofits don't always, give you a paycheck on a regular basis because it's not there. So I always said another employment to make sure that you got to feed the children, So you got to, but, and I'm saying that to say and that's still the situation that, the Federation folks sometimes got to wait a little while, to catch up on the paycheck. But that commitment keeps them there. So I'm making that appeal, that find folk who would help to support the work. And there may be other kinds of unions like that are working basically with poor families.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, now Rita. I'll let you have the last word and challenge.
Cooperatives are the best kept secret. For some reason, people don't, or especially the younger generation, doesn't know enough about cooperatives and how important they are. So I would say besides supporting each other, that we should get the word out to young people. And young people look at Facebook and Snapchat, and I can't even name them all, but I'm trying to get used to it because that's what they do. We need to let younger people know how important it is to own your own. And then how important it is to reach back and help others. So I would say that would be one of the main things I would do in the cooperative movement.
The time, I'm going to wrap up, but I was sitting here calculating quickly. I think I come up with at least 120, if about not 150 years of experience here on the stage. All devoted, my summary would be this. We've heard from John Johnson about co-ops and struggling farmers and access to markets. We've heard from the Zipperts about the struggling farmers in the South. We've heard about credit unions and low-income communities using that credit union. So in addition to about 125, 150 years of experience, I hope in the diversity of our panel, I hope you all end up tonight with both an appreciation for their good work, but again, the diversity of cooperatives and the hope they give. And a big round of applause to our inductees. Okay.